Welcome to the Exploress, the Halloween edition. Time traveling through women's history, one era at a time. I'm Kate Armstrong. Hey, listener. I'm currently on maternity leave, but to get us in the Halloween spirit, I'm re-releasing my first ever Halloween special about the 19th century mediums who used their connection to the dead to find fame and fortune. But this isn't just an old episode repeating. I've remastered and re-recorded it to give it a bit of a 2024 glow-up. So, grab your hair jewelry, your black bonnet, and get ready to go into a trance. Let's go traveling. But first, a shout out to some of my patrons. My newest pirate queens, J. Lil, Teresa, Tina, Emily, and Kitty. My new lady president, Claire. My new boss lady, Mary B. My warrior queens, Alexis, Amanda, Christina, Ika, Jessie, June, Neve and Sloan, and Sarah. My imperial empresses, Letitia, Alyssa, Faye and Whimsy Soapworks, Somera, and Teresa. My Lady Pharaohs, Kot, Kimberly, Laura, Lori, Sophie, and the fabulous Courtneys. If you like the Exploress and would love to have more of it, you should become a patron. They get 1 to 2 exclusive bonus episodes a month. Some patrons also get historical movie and show reviews with special guests like Katie from Queen's Podcast and Jen and Jenny from Ancient History Fangirl. They also get a chance to star in some of our episodes. In fact, you'll hear several patrons' voices in this special. To find out all about it, just go to my website, theexploresspodcast.com, and click on Become a Patron. You're sitting at a big round table in someone's dining room. It's dark outside the windows. The only light comes from the many candles, glinting off jewelry and casting shadows over people's eyes. Everyone joins hands. Someone starts singing a hymn, and you join them. The sound of it slides across the floor, up the walls, vibrating through you. Then the young woman across from you lays her hands upon the table, fingers spread wide.
"Are there any spirits here?"
she asks. You wait, and then you hear a rapping. The spirits are amongst us.
"Is that you, Aunt Ida?"
You don't understand what they're saying, but the woman across from you does. She is the medium, the conduit through which the dead are to speak. New, controversial, and powerful, spiritualism swept like wildfire through 19th century America. Whether you were a believer or a skeptic, you couldn't ignore it. It was everywhere. The notion that the spirits of the dead weren't gone, but all around us, and they could be reached through a medium who was almost always a woman. Mediums offered people solace, entertainment, and proof of the immortal soul. But spiritualism also offered women a way to escape the strict societal ropes that bound them. It literally offered them a seat at the table, giving them a voice and the power to use it. And many did, on stages and in parlors across the country. Even the White House saw its fair share of late-night seances. Ghosts were alive and well in the 19th century. But what made the Victorian era so haunted? And what gave ladies ownership over the business of talking to the dead? Let's start in Hydesville, New York on March 31st, 1848. We're in the house of 2 teenage sisters, Kate and Maggie Fox. Their mother, Margaret, is getting very freaked out by the ghost the girls claim is trying to communicate with them. It keeps rapping loudly on the walls and the floor. They tell a neighbor that they've made contact with a spirit, the devil, whom they call Mr. Splitfoot. The neighbor doesn't believe them, so they say, "Come on over, see for yourself." And so the neighbor does. The sisters climb into bed, their mother hovering close.
Now count 5.
One says, and what do they hear?
Count 15.
One says, the spirit obliges. It even raps out the neighbor's age, 33. They are invited over by some other excited neighbors, Isaac and Amy Post, who ask that they try and reach the spirit of their deceased daughter. The Posts have a lot of friends in high places, whom they invite over to partake in this phenomenon. At first, the raps are a binary system, just yes and no. But Isaac works out a handy alphabet system so the dead can spell out whole words and sentences. Everyone is talking about these Fox girls and their communion with the dead. So they are taken to New York City's Barnum's Hotel, where they begin offering 3 seances a day at $1 a pop. The Fox sisters are an immediate sensation. Spiritualism, the belief that we can reach the dead and talk to them, has arrived, and it's done it in a big way. But why is 19th century America so obsessed with being haunted? Spiritualism's first stirrings developed in Austria with an 18th century healer named Franz Anton Mesmer, who concluded that all living things have magnetic fluid inside them. The planets send out invisible rays that affect the flow of that fluid in a phenomenon he called animal magnetism. If you harness that magnetism with metals like iron and minerals, applied while a patient is in a mesmerized state, you can actually control the body. You can even use that magnetism to heal it. He becomes quite the big deal with this theory, treating guys like Wolfgang Mozart. When some people awaken from a mesmeric trance, they claim to have experienced visions of spirits in some dimension, not in ours, but somewhere close by. Meanwhile, Swedish mystic Emanuel Swedenborg seemed to know an awful lot about the afterlife. He said there were 3 heavens, 3 hells, and a middle plane, the spirit plane, which is very much like the world on Earth. But the whole thing doesn't really take flight until Andrew Jackson Davis starts hearing spirits from a very early age. In 1844, after putting himself into a mesmeric trance, he wanders into the mountains, where our friend Swedenborg's spirit speaks directly to him. Andrew writes the messages down, and they reveal that the spirit world isn't a static place, but one that moves, one that can be reached into and wandered out of. There isn't just one heaven and one hell. There are spheres, and spirits can move up and down them, which means that death isn't an ending, but an evolution, a new state of being. But how did this idea work its way into the Christian public's consciousness? Remember that in the 19th century, we're living in a world of spheres. There's the public one, where men vote and work and, make decisions, and the private sphere, where women raise children and clean and have hysterical fits. We're living in a very Christian society in America, and we women are considered moral pillars, guiding lights to keep us all on the pure path. And so the ladies are an important part of the family and community's spiritual life, including in the church. It is one of the only public places they exercise real power. But as a rule, women aren't allowed to be clergy, and they're not allowed to serve in high church positions. Oh, no, it's not for you to talk in church. Just you sit quietly and listen to this old man tell you how to save your soul. A lot of people, men and women alike, are losing faith in the rigid fire and brimstone, you were born already sinning and separated from grace model. Many of these are liberal-leaning reformers who feel that Protestant churches aren't holding up their end of the spiritual bargain. They aren't helping restructure constricting roles for men and women, aren't helping women get the vote, and they aren't emancipating slaves. They're just holding up the status quo. Spiritualism, though, takes a different approach. Instead of saying that souls are naturally sinful, it says that souls are naturally divine, that all of us have an inner light and connection to the spiritual. The soul can be a bridge between this life and the hereafter.
Still, monstrous evils afflict the dwellers of the earth,
wrote Cora Wilburn, a well-known spiritualist of her day.
And as the Bible fails to apply the remedy, Must there not be a higher and a safe guide? There is, in the human soul.
It helps that things are changing briskly in America. This is the era of Charles Darwin and his evolutionary theory, of the beginnings of electricity and the fast-moving train. America is moving toward industrialization. It's on the cusp of flushing toilets, bicycles, typewriters, lights that turn on and off without the use of a match. You'd think technology would blow the lid right off this talking to spirits business. But to most people, all of this science stuff feels a whole lot like magic. Communing with the dead feels about as probable as sending invisible messages through wires. Take the telegraph. In 1842, a guy named Sam F.B. Morse puts a petition for $30,000 before Congress. Years earlier, while away on business, Morse found out that his wife had fallen ill. But by the time he got home, she'd already been buried. Apparently, his heartbreak over getting the news too late was part of what inspired him to look into long-distance communication. It may even have pushed him to invent the electric telegraph and develop the Morse code that bears his name. In 1842, he wants to build an experimental telegraph line between Baltimore and Washington, but the proposal actually gets laughed off the Senate floor. A guy fabulously named Cave Johnson gets up and says that,
What the hell? If we're going to throw money at that, why don't we just chuck some at the mesmerists? And how about some for those Millerites who are predicting that Christ will rise again in 1844?
Oh, how everyone laughed. Electricity won't really sweep the nation until 1882, and even then, a lot of people are still using oil lamps well into the 1920s. The idea of messages shooting through the air, invisible, seems like some kind of dark magic. And I mean, that makes sense. It's invisible, unfathomable, just like talking to spirits. In fact, spiritualists use the telegraph to help explain what they do. One medium said that spirit communications flowed
from mind to mind as electric fluid on a telegraphic wire.
That's how spiritualists explain why spirit circles should be formed of equal parts men and women. It's about creating a harmonious sort of charge between women, the negative charge, and men, the positive. And there are plenty of new sciences that rely on the invisible and interpretive. Sociology, for one. Anthropology for another. And of course you have phrenology, the art of fondling people's head lumps, which can tell what kind of person you are. Phrenology helps prove that men and women are equals. Lydia Fowler, one of the first women to get a medical degree in America, gives enthusiastic lectures on it to audiences made up almost entirely of women. The idea that we can talk to spirits isn't some weird offshoot of science. Leading minds of the day take it pretty seriously. Alfred Russel Wallace, co-founder of evolutionary theory, is a fan. Later in the century, he'll be ridiculed for being so enamored with spiritualism. But like many, he sees it as worthy of scientific study.
The whole history of science shows us that whenever the educated and scientific men of any age have denied the facts of other investigators on prior grounds of absurdity or impossibility, the deniers have always been wrong.
Instead of damning spiritualism, in some ways the rising tide of science helps to make room for it. Science is illuminating many things, but it's also confusing things in a fast-changing time. We're seeing this massive shift from agricultural to industrial, from individual makers to mass production. Technology is speeding up the pace at which we live, and that has people reaching for answers, wanting something to hold on to amid the mad rush of the times. The church isn't offering answers, but we're not quite ready to embrace science either. Neither of them can altogether cure what Abby Sewell calls the
disease of a starved heart.
But perhaps the spirits on that elevated plane can help us. Plus, spiritualism provides scientific proof of something a lot of people yearn for, that the soul actually exists. Plenty of men are involved in the movement, but it's really women like the Foxes who bring it exploding into the mainstream, and women who drive the demand for it. Why? Because it turns out the Victorian ladies have plenty of reasons to want to be haunted. In Victorian-era America, death is never far from our hearthstones. Most people will only live into their 40s, and that's only if malaria, cholera, childbed fever, or 19th century medicine don't take us first. In this century, we have a much more intimate relationship with death than we do in the 21st. So it's no wonder that taphophobia is a common affliction, the fear of being buried alive. With illnesses that put people in a coma-like state and doctors unable and unwilling to do more than poke you a few times and maybe shout your name loudly, it's hard to know for sure if someone's dead. There are ways to test besides the obvious. For instance, your doctor might give you a compressed smoke enema. You didn't think we'd make it through this without at least one enema, did you? Victorian-era Americans are so worried about being buried alive in their coffins that Southern gent Edgar Allan Poe writes a terrifying short story about it. In The Premature Burial, a guy becomes obsessed with worry over the possibility.
To be buried while alive is, beyond question, the most terrific of these extremes which has ever fallen to the lot of mere mortality. The boundaries which divide life from death are at best shadowy and vague. Who shall say where the one ends and where the other begins?
Sometimes the dead are put in waiting mortuaries, which are kind of like hospitals, where attendants watch and care for the deceased in case they happen to revive. For people who want to take no chances, there are safety coffins. These are rigged with air tubes and handy bell and pulley systems. So if you wake up sweating in a tiny box, don't claw the woodwork. Just ring the bell and wait. Someone will find you before you run out of air. Probably. We also have to worry about so-called resurrection men, or grave robbers, which are apparently quite keen to dig up bodies and sell them to eager medical students. Sometimes they even ask women to act as bereaved family members, claiming bodies from poorhouses and crashing funerals to try and ascertain the state of a grave. Budding doctors of the age are always looking to study human cadavers, and apparently, donating your body to science isn't yet a thing. Grave robbing becomes such an issue that states pass anatomy acts to keep students' grubby hands out of grave sites. This is a serious issue in a very Christian society, where mourning is an ornate and intimate ritual, and in which we believe that if dirt touches the body, your soul can't rise to heaven. And then there is this depressing fact. Some 40% of children are dying by the age of 5. That's almost half of America's children. Sadly, that number grows amongst the poor and the enslaved. The women we traveled with in Season 1 are all so different, but they have this one horrifying thing in common. Virtually all of them, from secret lady soldier Sarah Emma Edmonds to Confederate spy Rose O'Neal Greenhow, lose at least one child to illness. The church will have you believe that death is a final ending. Next stop, either heaven or hell. But spiritualism proposes an alternative line of thinking, that our children are hovering just beyond us, watching us, that the afterlife is beautiful, and that souls evolve and grow and live on. Remember, too, that this is a sentimental age, a romantic age. It's also the era of American Gothic fiction. Edgar Allan Poe wrote his story, The Telltale Heart, about a heart beating under someone's floorboards in 1843. But before that, back in the 1820s, 18-year-old Poe joined the army and spent some time outside of Charleston, South Carolina. It's there that, legend has it, he fell in love with 14-year-old Anna Ravenel. But it was a forbidden love. They apparently had clandestine meetings in a local graveyard, until her father found out and locked her up in the house. But it was hot in Charleston that summer. Anna contracted some kind of illness, and she died. The heartbroken Poe wasn't even allowed to attend her funeral. Anna's father kept her burial place a secret from him. But Poe never forgot his young lover. His last poem, Annabel Lee, is said to be based on her. In 2017, I went on a Charleston ghost tour to the Unitarian Church graveyard, which is where she supposedly does her haunting. All I can report is that she did not appear to tell me whether Edgar was a good kisser or not. Victorian Americans are Gothic Americans. That's the point I'm making. They turn mourning into an art form, and that art form is, primarily, a woman's realm. It's women who sit by sick children's bedsides to nurse them. They don't go to hospitals. Before the Civil War, less than 15% of people die outside the home. They pass away in bed, surrounded by loved ones who can hear their final confessions. It's women who wash their bodies and arrange their funerals, also held at home. Clocks are stopped at the time of someone's death, silenced so as not to encourage their loved ones to stick around and haunt them. Anything reflective or shiny is covered, including all mirrors and glass. With the recent advent of photography, many families start taking pictures of their dead loved ones, called post-mortem photography. Children are dressed and posed like they're still living, propped up with books and things in their hands. Sometimes the family even poses with them, which feels a little bit intense, I agree. All of these rituals are part of the notion of the good death, a way of dying and of mourning that is central to the world we're currently traveling through. There are instructional booklets on the art of death and mourning, and many are aimed at women. Death and mourning fall very firmly into the woman's sphere. And we take our duties seriously. There are strict codes for mourning, particularly in the realm of dress. You start in deep mourning, wearing all black, then move on to full mourning, where you'll add some white ruffs and a collar. Then you'll have half mourning, where you'll wear lavender and gray, but nothing bright and flashy. Men, with their need to go out and run the business, I guess, tend not to wear mourning clothes for long. They grieve a spouse for 3 months, and often just by wearing a black armband. But women stay in mourning for much longer. Over a child, a year. A sister, 6 months. A widow for 2.5 years. This in a time when spouses and children are dying with some regularity. So, ladies, I hope you like wearing black. Nanny Haskins apparently looks great in it. After her brother dies in the Civil War, she writes with indignation about being complimented on how fetching she looks in her mourning clothes.
Becomes me fiddlestick. What do I care whether it becomes me or not? I don't wear black because it becomes me. I wear mourning because it corresponds with my feelings.
Mourning can be a socially isolating time. But something to appreciate about this ritual is that mourning clothes make grief visible. All people, familiars and strangers alike, have to do is look at you to know you're experiencing grief. Over in England, Queen Victoria really set the trend by grieving more aggressively than anyone. After her husband Albert dies in 1861, she wears all black for the rest of her life. But we Victorian ladies take deathwear even further. Turns out we are quite wild about making jewelry out of a dead loved one's hair. This is called hair work. Earrings, brooches, hair clips, you name it. Grandma's hair makes quite a lovely barrette. Many are created by ladies at home, with a few tools and some expert braiding skills. They're incredibly intricate, and while this may sound kind of gross to our modern ears, they're also pretty beautiful. And sweet if you think about it. Your mom kept your first lock of baby hair in an envelope after all. At least mine did. Why not make it into an expression of your love? Death and mourning happen in the home, so it makes sense that spirits, and communing with them, also happens there. It makes sense that communing with them is seen as a feminine act. As spiritual writer Cora Wilburn says,
"The medium may be man or woman, woman or man, but in either case, the characteristics will be feminine."
Spiritualism performs a very neat trick on women. It takes what in other contexts is seen as her weakness, sensitivity, passivity, impressionability, and turns it into something powerful. Spirits need someone to communicate through, a vessel, and women are sensitive. They're closer to the divine than men. Sure, women are also believed to be more susceptible to demon possession, but that means they're also more open to angels. And that, it turns out, grants us our own kind of power. Spiritualism is way ahead of its time when it comes to social reform and female power. That's because they believe firmly in individual sovereignty. A female medium needs agency, control over her body, her mind, her life, if she is to channel the divine. In this way, communing with spirits is almost an act of womanly defiance. This movement puts men and women on equal footing. It doesn't just give women a seat at the table, it puts them front and center, using their voices in a whole new way. Spiritualists are radical reformers, abolitionists, and suffragists, people who don't like the world as it is and aren't afraid to say so. Some of their views are radical enough that they make even the founding mothers of suffrage, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, fan their faces. But when the landmark Seneca Falls Convention in 1848 comes around, the first for women's rights, the spiritualists are there in force, giving speeches on a woman's right to control her body and use that body to commune with the spirits. Katie and Susan have to admit, in their book History of Woman Suffrage,
The only religious sect in the world that has recognized the equality of the woman is the spiritualists.
communing with the dead and women's rights. What a delightful pairing. It isn't hard to see what women find so attractive about it. First, it exalts women, but also anyone can participate in spiritualism, and the spirits can choose to speak to you no matter where you come from. A 12-year-old girl from a farming family, or a 70-year-old socialite in Boston, or a black mother in Washington, D.C., all have an equal chance of finding their spirit guides. And so the movement is popular throughout all social strata, and you don't have to be an expert to perform seances. Let's set one up in our parlor, shall we? First, grab that heart-shaped piece of wood called your planchette. Picture an early version of the Ouija board, which will come out at the end of this century. The planchette is a little placard we'll put our fingers on. The spirits will move it, either pointing at letters or, if we've inserted a pencil into it, will write down messages from the beyond. That's a much faster way to get answers than trying to decipher a series of raps. Let's try it. Spirits, will I ever have a torrid affair with Tom Hiddleston?
Y-E-S.
All right. But some mediums turn their special skills into a business. By far the most famous ones are teenage girls. Why? Well, for one, because young girls are considered innocent, a pure vessel for a spirit to pass through, and too unspoiled, as of yet, to lie and deceive. Plus, there's something kind of thrilling about seeing a young girl on a stage by herself commanding audiences. Especially for our male viewers, whom we normally tell to avert their gazes from women they don't know well. Let's go back to the Fox sisters in that hotel in New York, now joined by their older, married sister, Leia. All sorts of people come by to see them speak to spirits, both out of curiosity and because they want to prove that they're frauds. From the beginning, they're met with much scrutiny. After one of their first demonstrations, a so-called committee of ladies takes the girls into a private room and makes them strip to prove they aren't hiding any gimmicks under their dresses. Female mediums are always having to prove they're not frauds, and they do, to many people's satisfaction. If they are faking it, you can't blame them. The Fox gals are making some $90 a day for their seances, in a time when most girls their age make $8 a month, if they're lucky. Kate Fox becomes so popular that she's making $1,200 annually, a sum that puts her head and shoulders above most women of the time. The more famous spiritualists draw huge crowds, many admirers, and a kind of financial independence that most girls can't even dream of. So, of course, after the Fox sisters' success, there's an explosion of lady mediums, and there are plenty of people who want to put them through their spectral paces. For instance, in 1857, the Boston Courier sets up a $500 prize to any medium who can demonstrate paranormal ability to their group of experts. A challenge the Fox sisters accept. They are examined by 3 Harvard professors, who promptly fail them. But that doesn't seem to slow down their reputation much. Many famous people come to see them. Poet William Cullen Bryant, writer James Fenimore Cooper, famous abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison, and newspaper publisher Horace Greeley. He said, after having them over to his home,
Whatever may be the origin or cause of the rappings, the ladies in whose presence they occur do not make them.
All of the Stows, including Harriet Beecher Stowe of Uncle Tom's Cabin fame, are big fans. Harriet is somewhat skeptical, but apparently the possibility of speaking to her deceased children is just too great to pass up. Dashing surgeon and Arctic explorer Alicia Kent Kane comes on down, hoping to prove they're faking, but he just can't do it.
After a whole month's trial, I could make nothing of them. Therefore, they are a great mystery,
he said. And we know how men do love a mystery. He's particularly taken with the middle sister, Maggie Fox. She and this dashing 30-something tomcat carry on a secret courtship for years, and then a secret marriage. He loves writing her condescending letters about how she should make sure to stay pure while he's away.
Night has come, yet I sit down to show my dear little Maggie that she is not forgotten. Do, dear darling, be lifted up and ennobled by my love.
But then, while on a boat to St. Thomas, he has a stroke and dies. Maybe the spirits cursed him. The Foxes are even invited to the grandest house in the land, the White House. The First Lady at the time, Jane Pierce, brings the sisters over to the presidential mansion to conduct a séance after she loses her 11-year-old son. Poor Jane saw him die in a train accident, killed by piles of falling luggage. What a way to go. But this must have brought her comfort. Afterward, she writes to tell her sister that Benny visited her in her dreams 2 nights in a row. The Fox sisters are very much like the child actors from our century, coddled and given all sorts of wild freedoms. They're drinking wine and flirting. They're also an object of constant want and fascination. This state of being won't end well for them in later life. But for now, it gives them a unique kind of power. Remember when your English teacher made you read The Crucible? How those girls hopped out of bed, rose up against their repressive culture, and started accusing people of being witches, just because they could? That's what I think of when I think of the Foxes. Drunk on the power to heal and help and command attention, but also perhaps trapped in the fame they created for themselves. The Foxes aren't the only famous young mediums to charm the pants off their customers. Beautiful teenager Cora Hatch does so as well, many times. She is a well-known trance lecturer. That's when women get on stage, go into an unconscious state, and let the spirits speak through them. This is an era when women leading discussions and speaking on public stages is hugely controversial. It's okay for the ladies to speak in private groups and to all women listeners, but in public and in front of men? Horrors! But Cora, with the help of her spirit guides, talks about all manner of subjects not usually considered suitable for women. She seems so childlike, so innocent, which only impresses her audiences all the more.
Many times, almost numberless,
she wrote in her book, My Experiences While Out of My Body and My Return After Many Days.
I had experienced the wonderful consciousness of being absent from my human form, of mingling with prison friends in their higher state of existence.
Though the abolitionists and the suffragists often support each other, campaigning together, this issue of women speaking on stage to mixed audiences is something many of them split over. Even super progressive institutions balk at ladies on stage. In 1847, at Oberlin College, student and suffragist Lucy Stone is elected by the student body to give the commencement address, but the university won't let her. She can write it out, but a male professor will need to read it for her. A lady saying smart things in public? Now, that's just too much. But trance lecturers are an exception. They say what they want in front of audiences of thousands, and they get away with it. Because of course it isn't really them speaking. It's the voice of the spirits who have taken them over. As one rapt guy says of a trance lecturer's performance,
that a young lady not over 18 years of age should speak for an hour and a quarter, in such an elegant manner with such logical and philosophical clearness, a power not natural to the education or mentality of the speaker.
And though these women aren't often talking about suffrage up there on stage, they are speaking in public with eloquence and poise, proving that a woman can do so and make serious money in the meantime. Many women in the audience are struck by this and write these mediums heartfelt letters of thanks for what they're doing. These young women are pioneers. They blaze a trail for the female speakers who come after them. Years later, when nurse Clara Barton goes out on the lecture circuit, it's lady mediums who helped pave the way for her success. Trance lecturer Cora Hatch enthralls her audiences. She was marked from an early age as in touch with the spirits. She was born with a caul over her face, a membranous veil that some thought meant she had special powers. She certainly had the power to charm people. By the age of 15, she is owning the stage, calmly answering pressing questions from the audience like, was Jesus of Nazareth divine or human? But her sainted halo is dented somewhat when, at 16, she asks for a divorce from the first of her 4 husbands. Benjamin Hatch, her husband and manager, is 30 years her senior, which is cute. She files for divorce for what she claims is his financial and sexual abuse. You think it's hard for a woman to speak out against her abusers now? Imagine it in the 19th century. But the progressive spiritualist community and the many suffragists involved speak up for Cora. Where divorce might have ruined the prospects of some women of this era, Cora continues to travel and make money on her own. Some people even think spirits can cure the seriously ailing. It's so powerful that it can bring long-term sufferers up from their beds. Olivia Langdon lay in bed for 2 years after falling on a patch of ice. Sick of doctors' useless suggestions and desperate for help in any form she could find it, she turns to a spiritualist healer. The woman comes and prays over her body, and it cures Olivia. She will later go on to marry writer Mark Twain. Asha W. Sprague is also miraculously healed of debilitating illness by spirits. She is so convinced that her spirit guides healed her that she feels called to bring their message to the public. She spends the rest of her life giving talks and writing for spiritualist publications on topics like abolition and women's rights. As time goes on, some mediums grow more sophisticated. They use reeling chairs, levitating tables, papers emerging from under tables covered in the handwriting from the long deceased. There are writing mediums who take down ghostly dictation. There is spirit music too. Mediums sit at the piano, though they say they can't play a lick, and let ghosts come and play through them. There's even something called a spirit trumpet, used to magnify the whispers of the spirits. Over in England, artistic mediums like Georgiana Houghton paint beautiful works of art while in a trance-like state, said to be inspired by the spirits around them. These mediums take the practice of talking to spirits and turn it into a profession, making it one of the only jobs that a woman can hold. Of course, there are skeptics who object. Guys like Ralph Waldo Emerson think the whole thing is a dangerous sham. But it seems like most mediums believe, at least partially, in what they're doing, and they believe in their right to do it for money. As one writes,
"If my mediumistic fit is the one most in requisition, it is no less worthy of being exchanged for bread than any other."
They think they're offering an important public service, and when the Civil War comes, that service is more in demand than ever. Before the war, death in Victorian America was a fairly well-known companion. But at least most people died at home, surrounded by their families. When the war comes, young men start dying in their thousands. Worse than that, they're dying abruptly and far from everyone who loves them. It's hard to underscore what a huge, horrifying shift this is for 19th century Americans. Dying at home is a crucial part of the good death. That way your relatives, and especially the females, can be there for your last confession, to wash and dress your body and help ensure that they'll see you again in heaven. That's why so many of them are found on the battlefield still clutching pictures of their female relatives, and letters filled with half-finished last words. Imagine finding out not only that your husband or son has died, but that no one knows where they're buried or whether it was done properly. The utter abruptness of a life cut short. Women spill their feelings about this outrage onto the page, trying to understand loss on such an overwhelming scale. Many of them just can't, and they refuse to accept it. South Carolinian Grace Elmore writes in her diary,
I am trying to work out the meaning of this horrible fact, to find truth at the bottom of this impenetrable darkness. Has God forsaken us?
And it's not just the ones left behind who have anxious questions about what happens in death. Soldiers are, understandably, fairly preoccupied with the afterlife. Scores of books are published on the subject of heaven. There are songs and poems about it, all trying to paint it as a place that is both beautiful and not all that far from our own. Soldiers worry about their amputated limbs as well. Can they go to heaven with partial bodies? When hardcore Confederate hero Stonewall Jackson's arm is severed and left behind, some people actually give it a Christian burial out of anxiety over that very thing. It's no surprise, then, that spiritualism really makes itself a home and reaches its highest peak during the Civil War. It was something of a sensation before, a curiosity. In 1850, spiritualism had about 2 million followers. By 1862, that number had tripled. The Banner of Light starts a messages column where spiritualists commune with the departed spirits of soldiers and write down their messages for family and friends. Want ads from the dead? Oh my. Scores of spirit circles pop up in every city, dedicated to trying to reach lost loved ones. It's telling that the second most popular novel of the century, after Uncle Tom's Cabin, is The Gates Ajar, an epistolary-style book about grief, loss, and the afterlife. It's written by Elizabeth Stewart Phelps, who loses her love at the Battle of Antietam. She writes it to ease her own grief, but also for, as she puts it,
the helpless, outnumbering, unconsulted women, they whom war trampled down, without a choice or protest.
Like spiritualism, it paints a picture of a beautiful heaven just beyond the veil, one where loved ones remain who they were in life, and where families will one day be reunited. First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln is one of many sufferers who turn to spiritualists to ease their pain. In 1862, her young son Willie contracts a fever and dies in the White House. Heartbroken and inconsolable, she invites several mediums to call to spirits in the White House Red Room. Abe Lincoln even supposedly arranged one, at which he peppered the medium and his spirit guides with several pressing political questions. Years later, medium Nettie Colburn Maynard wrote that she was asked to the White House by Mary Lincoln to try and ease some of the burdens sitting on her husband's shoulders. She said she and her spirits talked to Abe for an hour, assuring him that if he went through with the whole Emancipation Proclamation, it would be the thing he'd be remembered for forever. It certainly sounds like something a radical spiritualist would say.
My child, you possess a very singular gift,
Abe supposedly said to her.
But that it is of God, I have no doubt. I thank you for coming here tonight. It is more important than perhaps anyone present can understand.
Like Jane Pierce, the First Lady before her, these seances seem to give Mary solace. After one, Mary writes to her sister of her deceased son.
He comes to me every night and stands at the foot of my bed with the same sweet, adorable smile he's always had.
Years later, Mary Lincoln takes her interest in talking with the dead even further. In the 1870s, she secretly seeks out the services of Maggie Fox to try and commune with Abe. The papers find her out, with the Times reporting.
The spirit of her lamented husband appeared, and by unmistakable manifestations, revealed to all present the identity of Mrs. Lincoln, which she had attempted to keep secret.
She's one of many people to pose for the spirit photographer William Mumler. He first discovers spirit photography by accident in the 1860s, when he develops a photo and finds what he called a girl made of light, his deceased cousin. Suddenly, he found himself surrounded by spiritualists wanting to use photography as a means of discovering their loved ones. By the late 1860s, he'd been embroiled in quite public fraud accusations, but Mary Lincoln goes to see him anyway. He uses his technological wizardry to produce a picture of Mary with her husband's ghost. And, fake or not, it brings her comfort. People call her crazy for this, but really, can you blame her? She lost several of her children and watched her husband shot right in front of her. If that's not a reason to want to believe in spirits, then I don't know what is.
A very slight veil separates us from the loved and lost,
she once said.
Though unseen by us, they are very near.
From the beginning, for every hand that flies up in favor of spiritualism, there has been another trying to prove it's all a bunch of hogwash. In 1850, just 2 years after the Fox sisters' first experience with rapping, Congress calls for an investigation of spiritualism. It never passes. By that point, the horse is way too far out of the gate. Later in the century, with the rise of magicians, guys like Houdini make it their business to debunk the spiritualists who are giving a bad name to magic. So does a woman called the Queen of Magic, Adelaide Herman. She knows for a fact that most mediums are really magicians of a sort, practicing illusions just like her, and she thinks it's unethical to pretend otherwise.
Exposures are of frequent occurrence,
wrote the New York Times in 1909.
Many of them highly sensational in character. Slate writing, spirit pictures, table tipping, rapping, and other features of spiritualism have been exposed time and again. The exposures mount into the hundreds.
And then, in 1888, some 40 years after she first helped found the spiritualist movement, Maggie Fox will finally admit that their tricks were all a hoax.
My sister Katie and myself were very young children when this horrible deception began. At night, when we went to bed, we used to tie an apple on a string and move the string up and down, causing the apple to bump on the floor. Or we'd drop the apple on the floor, making a strange noise every time it would rebound. A great many people, when they hear the rapping, imagine at once that the spirits are touching them. It's a very common deception.
Her confession sends shockwaves through the still million-strong spiritualist movement. According to the Chicago Tribune, those audience members
almost frothed at the mouth with rage.
Later, Maggie will try and take it all back. A spirit made her say it was all a lie, naturally. It turns out that a life of being a famous child actor medium doesn't leave you with a lot of other career options. Both Kate and Maggie die lonely, broke, and heavy drinkers. But even after their deaths in the 1890s, there are those who still wanted to believe them. The truth is that we want magic. We want to believe we can talk to those we've lost. And, fake or not, a lot of mediums believed they were giving people comfort. And they were.
Tell the Fox family I bless them,
wrote an ailing Horace Greeley, newspaperman.
I have been made happy through them. They have prepared me for this hour.
Female mediums claimed a kind of power and influence that in itself was almost like magic. They took the century's notions of womanhood and turned them into tools. Spiritualism was more than just parlor tricks and entertainment. It offered solace and gave women a new kind of agency. So next time you get out your Ouija board, give those ladies a shout. Until next time, happy Halloween! Thanks for listening. The Exploress will be taking a break in November and December, but I'll still be dropping new bonus episodes over on Patreon during that time. So if you miss me, hop on over and check it out. You can even try it for free for 7 days. Thank you to Carly Quinn for all her help making The Exploress, to Paul Gablonsky for my show art, Josh Stackhouse for my theme music, and the following for their vocal stylings: Andrew, Paul, Philip, Avery, and my brother John, and my fabulous patrons, Cara, Claire, Veronica, Ava, Bryn, Cheryl, Cassandra, Colette, Valerie, and Jessica.